But there's a huge amount of discontent in China at the moment. Like you were saying, I mean, I'm less worried about the whole Taiwan-China thing at the moment than I was because I think they've got so many problems at home. Although you never know, countries with problems at home sometimes do.
Well, that's kind of it's like the frightened wolf kind of thing.
They need to generate a distraction.
They're an export-driven economy that's all of a sudden trying to cut themselves off from certain parts of the world, all being cut off, and they don't have that. Even though everybody goes on about the Chinese middle class, they've still got a huge rural population that they just that can't afford anything. So they can't move the stuff that they produce there and go, well, we can sell it domestically instead. And meanwhile, they're doing things like almost like people, if you want to cut off iPhones from people in China, where they're probably supporting Chinese apps and all sorts of things. Totally. And people are just going to be really pissed off about that. And they're already pissed off in China.
Exactly.
Hello and welcome back to the Telecoms.com podcast. Properly back after an extended summer break, which consisted of one pod in the last 2 months, pretty much, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one mid-August, wasn't it?
But what a cracker it was.
That's brilliant.
Maybe we should just do that more often. Save our energy. So you can probably already tell by the accommodating laughter to my side that we're welcome back with a special guest, and not only a special guest, but I think probably our most frequent guest ever.
I'm very proud of that.
The one and only Mary Clark.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you know, I've forgotten what hat you're wearing now, but I'll invite you to get us up to speed on all that. So it's great to have you back, Mary.
Thank you.
I mean, you just happen to be in town, but it's perfect timing as ever. And you brought the weather with you.
Yeah, a little too much
this week.
It's a little too much
Proper
weather.
hot.
Yeah,
we're all us lads are sitting here in shorts. Mary's never seen so many masculine legs.
This is over on Tuesday, though, so that's sad.
Is it? Really?
Yeah.
It was
properly over.
Yeah, enjoy this weekend, because by Tuesday it'll be back below 20 again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well.
Which is like 70 Fahrenheit,
Yeah. I just do the 60. I just add 60.
Right.
It's easy.
So,
is that what you do? Is that the formula?
That's not how it works.
Oh, there's something much more, formal. That
so 30 is about 90-ish.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit less.
Yes, that's exactly it.
You have to do a calculation, then add 32, because 0 centigrade is 32 Fahrenheit.
That's right.
Yeah, my dad's one of these people who just works out like straight away, but he's got like a brain like a advanced calculator.
Right.
So. Yeah, I'm not doing that. That's not happening.
Anyway, we do centigrade. We do centigrade. Any Yanks got a problem with that? That's them. That's on
clearly.
So before we go any further, Mary has brought, even though she's been here loads of times, she knows the tradition of bringing a bribe.
That is correct.
I was just lamenting to Ian that the bribes have kind of dried up a bit this year, so it's good to see. Let's see, maybe you've started something, Mary. And you brought a bribe.
We've had a lot of beer, though, in bribes.
We mustn't discount like John Strand, who brought half of Waitrose.
Yes.
I mean, we've still got his Waitrose carrier bags here.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Has all his beer finally gone now? Because he was asking the other day.
We've got those Carlsbergs that we're never going to touch. Those are the emergency beers.
which are the huge
those
size.
are the desperate beers.
Those are desperate beers. I'm actually wondering whether I'd rather just not get pissed than drink Carlsberg.
I don't think it's as bad as Carling and some of the
I think that's
Fosters.
true. I think that's true,
it's
yeah.
drinkable.
But no, we've still got...
You're comparing terrible with...
We've got some of the moody ones, actually, which is relevant to Mary's bribe. We've got some of the ones we're too scared to drink, like this Tropical IPA, which is 6.3.
Oh, boy.
Well, that's nothing compared to some of these ones from Mary.
Elvis Juice, that's about 6.5. I think this one's Savage.
Well, there's some good
Lucaloid,
ones.
6.7. Yeah, well, let's get on to that now. So Mary brought these bribes, which is an American brewery called Lucky Pigeon.
Oh, this is fabulous.
Yeah, Lucky Pigeon, and she brought us a bunch of tins, and then also these little, what do we call them?
We call them Huggies. I call them Huggies. A lot of people
insulator
call them koozies as well.
Huggies and koozies, which keep your beer cold.
Yeah, it calls them something else, but we won't bring that up.
Yeah.
I call them koozies too?
No, I
Okay,
just
that's
came
all
up
right.
with that.
You're using other analogies.
I called them
but...
sheaths to be rude.
Yeah, Scott
has another.
Scott,
All right.
the ultimate in typical
potential meaning.
The typical one.
My sort of Sid James, sort of double entendre. So tell us, Mary, tell us about Lucky Pigeon.
So I'm
selling it.
Yay, thanks. If I need a still of that. Thank you, Pierre. That'd be great. So this is my nephew, Nick, and his wife, Leslie, and Leslie's sister, Bev. They're going to love listening to this. And her partner, her partner, Pidge.
I was about to say Bev and Bev.
I know, Bev and Pidge. So Pidge is actually, her name is Kathleen Pigeon. This is her last name is Pigeon. Oh. And so Pidge, Kathleen, and my nephew, Nick, are essentially in-laws through these sisters that, and they've been talking about making a gluten-free beer because she's real gluten sensitive for years, and finally did all the research, got an incredible business plan together, and then 2 years ago they opened in Biddeford, Maine, which is just south of Portland, Maine. And so for anybody listening that has no idea where that is in the United States, that's way up at the north.
Extreme northeast.
Extreme northeast. It's typically cold and filled with snow and mud half the year, but it's got about a month and a half there that's really quite nice.
About like England. England, but with more severe winters.
Yes,
right.
Way.
It is New England, isn't it, that area?
Yes, very much so, yeah. But this is like the very top. Yeah. It's like, you might as well be in Canada. It's like even like above part of Canada.
Yeah, Toronto's further south.
That's right.
Isn't it? Yeah.
And so, it's quite
You're not
wild.
as much of a map geek as I am.
So this is 100% gluten-free, which is a little weird, right? Because you're just like, well, how do they make all this type of beer? Because they make 12 to 13 different types of beer. So today, you guys are drinking Rock Dove.
Yep.
Which is a New England style IPA. And so that's going to be a slightly hazier IPA. It should have they'll tell you all the different notes that are on the can.
Right.
We're going to save one for Dario.
Well, actually, Mary did bring us a bunch of them, so we're good. We're only going to get through a fraction of what she brought. Bless her. She's lugged about 16 tins over from the States.
They're all 16-ounce cans.
Yeah.
Cans, so they're all full pints. So, and then you're going to taste a Sparkbird, and then you're going to taste the double IPA, which is more than 8%.
So I've got to say, we got slightly scared when Mary's going, you got to have a go at all this. And we were going, okay, that was 6%. And then she went, what about this? And I go, that's 8%. And we were like, look, Mary.
I know, right?
It's fucking 2 o'clock. Can't be doing 8%. But we're obviously going to give it a sip. And
so far, you were...
No, we think this is great.
It's really nice. It's like
it's a bit like Hazy Jane.
It does remind me because you said it was hazy.
Yeah.
We often drink Hazy Jane, which is like a BrewDog, the brewery.
Yeah, of course.
And it reminds me of that a bit, but it's a little bit stronger, I'd say.
And
it's got a little bit more of sort of dry hoppy. Thing going on.
Yeah, so we're making it with rice and with millet and things that don't,
Which one thing I don't get, you might not know the answer to this, and maybe your relatives can let us know, because I'm not really gluten insensitive, but as you know, I try not to eat bread.
I know,
sort of disagree. It gives me like some kind of inflammatory reaction in my muscles, causes me muscular pain. But apart from Weiss beers and wheat beers, I don't understand why beers got to have gluten in it.
They don't.
Yeah.
You don't have to. It's just a matter of the way in which historically specific traditional types of beers have had a taste to them. So it's almost a tradition more than anything.
Right.
Oh, sorry, honey.
Yeah. Because, I mean, like, they generally, the staple cereal is barley, isn't it? Not wheat.
Very much so.
And I don't know if barley is gluten-y or not.
Yeah.
It is it?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that answers my question,
that's really the issue. So
because you never eat barley. You don't have barley bread or anything.
No. Regular basis.
Is that all they use barley for?
I do barley.
They use it for animal feed a lot as well.
Animal feed and beer?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. But you don't need it. And the types of things that we're putting in here, we don't, like you can get, like there's that gluten-free one, the lager that's in Spain. I want to say it's made by...
Estrella?
Yeah. So they make one, right? Okay. But they add... I think you and I had one. I think I was out with you when we were in Borough
Barcelona.
Market.
Oh, in Borough.
And I was just like, okay, I need to try as many gluten-free beers as I can because we're getting ready to do this.
Right.
And what they're doing in that case is adding some sort of chemical to the mixture as they're making it to kill the gluten post the process.
It's just a protein, isn't it?
Yeah, and so what they're doing here is everything from start to finish. And we're making a sour, a pale ale, an American ale.
Do you like sour beers?
No.
I don't think I've had enough of them.
It's a thing.
Really?
I've had one, that's enough.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan, but we've just come out with a lager. I mean, it's... And everything.
You say we. Are you actively involved, or are you just a cheerleading?
I'm a little of both.
Okay, you got a little.
Yeah, but I mean that's not nearly as important as just I help them.
Yeah, no, of course.
A little of the strategic stuff, but nonetheless, I'm so thrilled to bring it to the UK.
Yeah, well,
first time it's ever been outside of the country.
Well, I like this one a lot. It's really nice.
I'm so glad.
Yeah.
No, nice one.
We'll keep trying as we go.
And thanks a lot for the what do you call these?
We'll call it koozies because that seems to be the most
koozies.
Most consistent one here.
And yeah, good luck, Lucky Pigeon crew. But thanks a lot. It's really tasty, definitely. And we are. You probably haven't heard the podcast before. I'm assuming you're going to hear this one because Mary go, look, you got to mention.
Yes.
But we drink pale ale, American style pale ale all the time. That's just what we do now, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
We're almost.
It's pretty much all I drink.
Almost.
It's all you drink anymore. Yeah.
24/7.
Is it?
Well,
either that or a bottle of wine.
Or both.
Not on my own.
Right. Okay.
Well, that was a good episode.
That was a good episode. Yeah. Well, so one thing I got.
Forget the telecom
Do you know what?
stuff.
Shall we do the tasting? Shall we get the tasting stuff?
Oh yeah, sure. That'd be great.
Let's do a hot just in case we forget. I mean, I don't mind mentioning them again, but we might forget if we don't do it now.
So we have a rock duck. So we should be
we
doing
got a Wingspan.
Yep.
Which is called a double IPA, which we consider a single IPA 6.5%. You got to start shitting yourself at that stage. 8%. My God. So we got that.
Who was it who brought us one on before that was like one of those Belgian beers?
Wasn't
it
it,
was in the teens, the alcohol.
Wasn't it?
Yeah.
What's his name from Reckitt Symphony?
Oh, it was
Jeff.
Jeff. You're
Jeff.
right.
Yeah. He brought us some 11%.
I don't think I could drink it.
Oh, the other day I tried a BrewDog that was a stout, that was black, and it was 12%.
Oh god.
And with a bit of tequila in it. I took 2 sips and I was like, no.
No, that's wrong.
Awful.
That's just-
Everything's wrong about that.
Every single word in that sentence was not good.
It was awful.
And then we got a third variety, which is called Sparkbird, which is just called an American IPA,
Yeah.
as opposed to a New England hazy IPA,
Yeah.
I suppose. And look, and they even list the hops, I presume, on the front:
Yes.
Cashmere, Centennial, and Amarillo. Whereas the Savage one, we don't even. They're like, you don't need to know about hops. You just need to be sitting down when you drink it.
I think, I don't know how many, they're going from, they're continually changing the labels.
Right. Okay.
So sometimes it's on there, sometimes
Okay,
it's
well,
not.
on this particular one. What do you think we should do, Ian? We're doing a taste of these other ones. Should we try the American IPA or the double? Should we finish
Which
off on
one's
the double?
stronger?
The double's the stronger
Well,
one.
let's work our
Go
way
the
up.
weaker one first.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what
This
you
is really
normally
a
do,
beer
isn't it?
podcast with a bit of telecom.
It's like when you
Yeah,
do those.
increasingly.
I feel like we should be talking about some sort of
forget
telecom
about
activity
telecom.
before.
There's
And we
always
got-
too much talk of telecom on this podcast.
That's
We've
right.
got to say, Mary would normally be matching us step for step, but she's got some grown-up stuff to do after the pod.
I do, so I'm...
So
That
she's,
even looks strong.
Yeah.
It's kind of thick
I
looking.
think it
and
sort of slightly growled at me as it came out of the tin.
I was just so happy. This has been through, for everybody that's listening to this, this has been on a flight from the U.S. to the U.K., from the U.K. to Ireland, Ireland back to the U.K., and to 2 different hotels.
Right.
So I've lugged this thing everywhere.
Wow.
So,
And you've been lugging it yourself.
It's extra fermented, yeah.
yeah, totally.
so,
Right.
are
Down
we
the
supposed
hatch.
to look at it and like?
No,
up
no,
to
you
the
just
line
drink
like
it.
wine. Probably
It was a
not.
bit cloudy as well, isn't it?
yeah,
It is,
yeah,
yeah.
this would be a bit cloudy. But to have a double IPA that's gluten-free, it's, you don't find those.
No, so this isn't the double IPA. Yeah,
It is.
It's a bit more
Do you know
fruity,
what?
this one.
I thought it would taste different. Being the alcohol content it is, I thought it would have an overpowering taste, but it doesn't. Yeah, it's fruity, but it's actually almost not as strong
Right.
tasting as a rock dove.
Yeah.
Let's nick the rest of this and then have a go
Want to
at
try a bit?
I'm getting leather, apricot,
I'm getting notes. I'm getting just a flutter.
asparagus.
Yeah, you don't want
Can you
asparagus.
imagine? Oh, God.
Or
No.
what if it was asparagus coming out? That would be weird, wouldn't it?
Oh, that would be bad. That would be so bad.
Right. Do you want to neck this and we'll do the other one?
Yeah.
Oh, you guys are so fabulous. Thank you for doing this. I mean, I can't wait to tell them.
Well,
Can't
Mary,
promise what condition I'll be in later.
You are
though.
somewhat playing to our strengths here.
Well, I know my audience. I mean,
Yeah.
let's face it. As your longest standing guest, I should know, at this point.
Yes. You should know our MO.
That's right.
Right. So you're ready for the wingspan.
No, this is... Oh, wait a minute. Did you just do the Sparkbird first?
That was a Sparkbird, yeah.
Oh, so that's not the double IPA. So
No,
that's
no.
just the American IPA. That's right. You're
Yep.
going up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But isn't that nice? I like the Sparkbird. That's my...
That was really nice.
I really like that one.
I thought when beers go above 6%, they often get a bit chewy. And,
True. Yeah.
But that was good.
I really like that one. I prefer the Sparkbird myself
This one
over the
looks
Rock
like
Dove.
it has chewy potential.
Yeah,
So how much is this one?
8%.
This is 8.
That's just why
So
we're...
that one was
6.8.
That was 6.8.
6.8. Okay.
6.8.
Yeah, right. That
the,
makes
the
sense.
one we're drinking all of is 6.5, and this is 8.
I anticipate this being chewier. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's even more opaque.
Yeah.
It looks, yeah.
A little frightening.
Very, it looks a bit scary.
It looks like
It does
Peach
not taste
juice.
like it's 8% though. Yeah, it's got a bit of peachy.
no,
Yeah,
it
it
looks
does
like a
again.
peach juice. Yeah.
It
got a
doesn't
bit of-
taste overly.
It looks like peach juice, and it's actually got
It
a
does,
peachy
yeah.
sort of.
Oh, I
Yeah.
commend your family on doing stuff that's like strong but kind of drinkable because it's, normally 8% beers aren't good, I don't
Yeah.
think.
No, so this is the brewmaster
That's nice.
guy by the name of Scott, and his palate is another Scott, and he is.
I'd
it's his palate.
drink a pint of that
Oh,
and then probably
geez.
regret it afterwards.
Well, that's
but
it,
I
you
would,
know.
And then go and fight someone.
Yeah,
Well, that would
go
be
and have an
weird.
argument in a bar about not being able to pay with cash.
like your father. I paid attention.
I remembered, wow, yeah.
Yeah.
can't remember which one that was on now.
Well, it's come up a few times. I think we mentioned it on the last pod as well. Right, and before we get into what we're going to talk about, well, actually, let's talk about what we're going to talk about, but I'm going to also invite Mary to get us up to speed on her professional larking about before we do that. What we're going to talk about is, perhaps slightly awkwardly, as we got an American guest on, but we're going to talk about sort of some of the manifestations of the sort of US versus China fuckery that's going on at the moment. The biggest one, like by far the most read stories on Telecoms.com over the last couple of weeks have been ones I've written about Huawei sort of launching a new phone at a time when the Americans have tried to make it such that Huawei can't get hold of any decent silicon.
Yeah.
Not only can't get hold of any like Qualcomm chips or MediaTek chips, but also can't use foundries like TSMC.
Yeah, I don't think
to even make their own design.
I don't think the Qualcomm stuff's going to upset them very much.
Well, they probably did use Qualcomm back in the day.
Huawei wouldn't have done in its phone.
So they've been using Kirin forever. You're saying
the high silicon can do what Qualcomm does on the design side.
Okay,
and they don't even need people like Marvell on the base station side. They produce their own chips for that.
So who was doing their modems before though? That would have been Qualcomm.
Maybe at some point they had Qualcomm modems in the phones.
We'll get into that. Which reminds me of one of the excerpts we did from the last pod where you just started steaming into the subject while I was trying to introduce.
That is exactly what he did last
time. Yeah.
I remember this.
And so anyway, so we're going to talk about that, and I've just got some thoughts more generally on that dynamic and how it's all going.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that, and I think another thing that's come up quite a lot this week, we've written one or two stories about the Open RAN market in general, and I think, Ian, that's definitely one of your strengths, is getting really under the skin of that area, and so we're going to look at it to some extent from a point of view of has it all been a complete waste of time sort of thing. I mean, I'm being deliberately sort of provocative and facetious with that, but, you know, it's a question worth asking. So we can get into that, and then I think we're going to finish off something called Mary's Eye that we wrote this week about one of the most senior people at the European Commission called Margarita Vestager. Sorry, John, I probably didn't pronounce that right. She's Danish.
You can never pronounce it right if it's Danish because it's an unpronounceable language unless you're Danish.
And I'm still not sure if it has an A at the end or an E.
Yeah, I think it's E.
Is it E?
Margarita? Yeah, with an E.
T-H-E.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
It's not Margarita like a drink.
No.
But it's pronounced something like Margarita.
Yeah. There's something to it.
With like nothing like understanding.
It's like a little chewy.
If you want to know how you pronounce it, go back to the John Strand pod and he does it proud.
Good.
And yeah, she might be leaving. She's having a temporary leave of absence to go and apply for a job at the what's it called?
European Investment Bank.
European Investment Bank, which is basically where a lot of EU money gets chucked about.
Yeah.
And if she does leave, then what does that mean? Because she probably, together with Thierry Breton, is the single person in the bureaucracy that affects the telecoms industry the most.
Just to mention John, you mentioned John, but I saw him a few days ago. He watches the pod, so
yeah.
And he got phoned up at some point by someone from Denmark, obviously, and I've not heard him speak Danish very much because
Monty Danish,
and that just makes me realise what a bizarre language it is to sort of English ears.
Yeah,
it's really
hard,
and it's not really odd. It's not even that similar to like Swedish or something.
No, it's like Swedish.
Yeah, it is.
It is
they
similar.
Understand each other.
Oh, okay.
Really?
Maybe I was confusing it.
The Swedes don't understand the Danes understand the Swedes. And if you read it, it's the same.
Oh, sorry.
The pronunciation of
the ones who really understand each other is the Norwegians.
And Swedes understand each other.
And then Finnish has got nothing to do with anything. That's just out of left field.
Yeah, that's not a Scandinavian
It's more to do with Hungarian or something.
Yeah.
And Icelandic is also very similar to Swedish.
Yeah.
Right.
But if you look at it on paper, they look the same. But because the Danes basically swallow all the consonants, and it's so
it's like a heavy dialect.
So odd.
I had no idea.
You have this situation where the Swedes can't understand the Danes, but the Danes can understand the Swedes. Oh. So I've been told years ago from Danes that I used to know.
Do you know what makes me want to do? Did you ever watch The Killing?
No, I know about it, but I never saw it.
That was brilliant, and I believe that was subtitled and recorded in Danish.
It's one of those Scandi.
Yeah.
It's
really
it's
noirs.
The Bond villain, that guy. The Danish actor.
Oh,
Mads Mikkelsen?
Yeah.
Is he like the one that he's like the only one everybody knows, right?
Yeah.
But he does look properly shifty.
He does.
He gets,
plays Nazi in the new Indiana Jones.
Yes, he does. I was watching that last night.
Indiana Jones and the Last Walking Stick.
Yeah, it wasn't that...
Look, I'm never going to say anything bad about it. I forget it. It's like Star Wars for me. I'm going to love it. I don't care.
I know. Mary won't listen to reason on the most recent
I'm sorry.
Star Wars.
I'm not,
No?
you could talk.
She's so into Star Wars that she just can't see that the latest ones were shite.
I thought the first one of the last three was okay.
Force Awakens. Yeah.
I thought the Force Awakens was quite good. I thought the other two were okay.
There are issues. I have notes for both, but
What do you think of the ones that came before that, the three that...
They suddenly look better in
Ewan
comparison.
McGregor was in.
That's right. I mean, it is interesting. The ones, the prequels, oh God, now.
Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, Attack of the Clones is 2, and Revenge of the Sith is 3.
Revenge of the Sith, and then
but I don't remember...
Well, the introduction of the Muppet characters. That little floppy...
That was the first one.
Jar Jar Binks, yeah.
I
didn't think that were that bad, to be honest with you.
No, and actually now
The Phantom Menace.
Thank you.
Menace.
Thank you. Just look it up. Fantastic.
Yes.
He watches it every weekend.
Yeah, every weekend he knows. But no, I think those are great, actually. I really do like those a
People
lot
got
more.
a bit annoyed by the young Anakin. He's a bit stroppy and petulant.
But then again...
Isn't he supposed to be?
Yeah, I guess so.
Exactly. He turns into Darth Vader.
He's supposed to be a dick, and he is.
Then he becomes the supreme dick.
Yeah, he's going to be Darth Vader. You got to have some of that coming.
I am the supreme dick. Right. Don't quite sound like James L. Jones, do
already.
It's out of control. It's because we've been on the 8%, isn't it? Okay, let's get back into it. So I think I've covered the three things we're going to do. So before we get into it, Mary, just let us know what you're up to at the moment.
Well, after spending almost 30 years in mobile, which is just a ridiculous thing to say out loud. I mean,
he is doing anything slightly humbling.
Yeah, I know. It's just really depressing.
I've been here nearly 10 years.
I know. Well, then we're not going to talk about that either. I know. The two of you. I mean, so I'm now working at a technology company called Brivo, BRIVO, and we manage access to and from structures through the cloud. So access
there's a
control,
sort of smart building
stuff. So we are making it so that you can go anywhere in any building, so you can get in securely with a badge or with a little fob if you want, right? Or through the mobile. But we're doing it in a way so that you're controlling it remotely, you're managing it from any place, and it could be any type of structure. So we cover about 42 million square meters in about 60 countries.
Right, so pretty big scale.
Yeah, it's quite. The company's been around for 20 years, and it actually started as a cloud business, which of course 20 years ago.
Wow.
That was not a thing. But I was in mobile for so long. I was in there when we started talking about digital transformation, which was really, we need to make sure everything's actually connected now.
Right.
Right.
We've got a trade show coming up called Digital Transformation.
I'm very familiar with those guys. Yeah.
And it's coming to a stage with digital transformation with me where this has been around for quite a long time now. Have we got there yet?
No. Well, what's the last thing?
It's going to be called digital transformation in 10 years, Scott. You know that.
You know what I mean?
Well, it still is in buildings.
Yeah.
I got dumb buildings all around us, right? I mean, how many smart buildings are there that are managing every aspect of the space, right? From an energy consumption to your access control to your, just simply making it so that you have the ability to reserve a desk and you have all of these types
this one's reasonably smart in that way. But even smart can be quite dumb. Like I was just showing you earlier how for some reason just our little cold water tap's got to be controlled by a smartphone.
I know, but
that's... dedicated smartphone.
What?
It doesn't necessarily,
Haven't you seen that little thing? Do you ever go and get any water down in the kitchen?
No, I don't drink water.
What is that?
There's no active ingredient.
Too much of a man to drink water. Well, anyway, they've got this little console and they've basically got a dedicated device that's only got 4 buttons for sort of small or large glass and maybe one for hot or fizzy. It
was sparkling and stuff.
Yeah. But it's a whole smartphone. You can tell it's a smartphone because you can see the little aperture for the camera. So they're using what would probably cost 100 or 200 quid, like entry level sort of Chinese manufactured smartphone, but just to do this single function.
So Huawei's spying on us when you get water.
That's it.
Oh, that's it. We're going to feed into that one in a minute.
Come on, America, sort that out.
I know exactly. So I was at this show earlier this week called PropTech Connect. At the O2, and that was the reason I was in town.
Which presumably is short for property technology.
Property technology. Well, of course, if you can't turn it into some sort of smart acronym, what's the point?
Yeah.
So
well, you're with the right company for coming up with event names.
Yeah. Well, of course, and I'm in marketing, so it's what I do.
And how did that go?
It was very good. It's really interesting.
That's the main reason you're over here. But much as I'd love to think you came over just for the pod.
Well, I always want to just come and see you and be on the pod. I mean, I would love to hang out with you guys. But I mean, this whole business of taking an old building and turn it into smart. You guys have got a brand new building here.
Yeah.
Right. So you were able to start, and the UK is actually pretty far ahead. You've got one of the first, almost completely smart buildings. I'm putting this in air quotes over 22 Bishopsgate. And it was built from the ground up to be as smart as possible.
I've heard of that.
Someone's got something nice to say about the UK.
Yeah, you do.
Because recently there hasn't been a lot of positive.
Oh God, I was just chatting to Mary before earlier, and I was sharing the leader. Have you read The Spectator this week yet?
Well, that's exactly what I was thinking. Broken Britain.
Yeah, the leader on The Spectator is just talking about these councils that are just all fucked.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
And then you've got school buildings that are falling down. I mean, I know from a journalistic point of view, you can aggregate all these things to paint a more apocalyptic picture.
Well, I got the thing through and I looked at the headline and I thought, come on, guys. It's not like, it's not like you go out on the streets and you get shot by gangsters when you walk down the road, which happens in a lot of countries.
Yeah.
So...
and you've got places like, I hear these horror stories about, for example, San Francisco in the States. There's plenty, and Baltimore, yes, of course. So there's plenty of places that are knackered. But yeah, back to your point and Ian's point, it's nice to know that we're doing some stuff.
You guys are quite advanced, and this is going to be a really important market for us. And so we're going to be investing in more people and more feet on the street. We're with it's called the UK Prop Tech Association. And they're in 22 Bishopsgate, and so we're going to work with them a great deal. So no, there's a lot happening, and really, buildings, it makes sense when you think about digital transformation. There's not a lot digital naturally about a big building, right?
Yeah.
So that's the last frontier of digital transformation, and that'll be the last thing that we do. So as we figure out how to retrofit these older buildings and try to make them and meet, you guys have got sustainability goals. We don't have any of that.
Yeah.
Not in the United States, really. No.
We haven't signed up for this zero carbon by 2040.
I mean, there are localized, spaces, cities in the U.S. that have set targets, but, this whole idea of you guys being, net zero by 2030?
Yeah.
Do you come across
Freshwave at all? Because they do the connectivity, I think, for 22.
Yeah, we had them on a few months ago.
So Tom Bennett was on here, yeah.
Yeah, no,
they carry a neutral infrastructure, basically.
That's right. And so to me, that's actually the real connection into, you guys were really talking about private wireless networks not so long ago.
Sorry.
He's
having a go at me because my
he's slowly going in the corner for some reason.
So I'm on the board of directors of this company called CTS out of the U.S., and they've been a disaggregated, or what is DAS, DAS, and organization, if you will, inside of buildings for like 40 years. And so they're now getting into private wireless networks. This is where I really think we're going to see that bridging of taking, what's the opportunity for the mobile operator globally to really say, okay, look, where haven't I invested in extending my network, and I don't care whether it's millimeter wave, or I don't care if it's Wi-Fi. I don't care if it's 5G. I don't care what it is. But I want to be the one that supplies the in-building network.
Yeah.
So it's the connectivity.
Well,
so
I
think there's something there. So that's where, to me, I'm getting excited about that opportunity. I'm sorry.
And that's such a big not at all. That's such a big thing to do with. This has come up a lot this year. Like the major theme, certainly for Telecoms.com at World Congress this year, was to sort of show me the money from 5G type of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that we're particularly clever for asking that question.
Show me.
But show me the money. Yeah, one of my better headlines that I've ever written. But then you think of opportunities like this, and the thing that I really struggle to get my head around, and maybe this is where things like Freshwave come in, is there are so many potential stakeholders in turning a, for what a better term, dumb building into a smart building. How does the telco sector make sure that it is at the front of the queue or near the front of the queue to get some of the piece of the action?
Well, it starts at the commercial real estate owner operator level, and it says, okay, who owns the building and is subsequently leasing the space? So that person or organization then has the facility manager that is simply saying, okay, I need to attract people into this building. I need to make sure I have the best possible connectivity. I need to make sure it's working in every little corner of every office. And this soundproof space that we're in right now, that becomes a part of the amenities that they need to constantly be increasing in order to attract people into the building and stay in the building. And so what you're looking for like reserve the desk or be able to order lunch from the sushi place next door and have it delivered all through one workplace app, for example. These are all the kinds of things that a commercial real estate company is going to try to do. Same with the enterprise, right? So if Informa says, all right, look, I'm willing to do this. I'm willing to come into this building. Because you guys have been in like a bunch of different places over the last few years, right?
It's amazing. It just comes into this building at all in that
third
case.
podcast studio you've been to.
I thought so. I thought so. So
there was Maple House, then there was just around the corner. And then
this building has the worst connectivity ever.
Yeah, so this is a perfect example.
For wireless, yeah.
For cellular, it's got no connectivity
Which
at all.
Insane.
And the Wi-Fi system works in a very kind of, if you're on the corporate network already, if your laptop's set up to use it, you'll go onto it. But if you're a guest and you're trying to find the password, then you can only find it out by logging on to the corporate network.
It's insane.
So it's just totally...
And there's enough fiber to the building at this point to help deliver, hopefully, at least millimeter wave.
Yeah.
So why is there not, that level of effort? And again, it doesn't have to be that. Just go with Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
The operators, I think, have this... And I think there are a couple that are a little more sophisticated about this that are just like, look, a subscriber is a subscriber is a subscriber, right? I don't care, what kind of network they're on. If they're using and they get an invoice from me that has my name on the top of it, I don't care what I'm delivering to them.
At the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of that mindset, but I could go on and on about the way operators think. So, but nevertheless,
that's what you were doing for all those
years,
decades.
all those preceding decades. So now I'm kind of interested at the convergence of this. So. It's kind of cool to have, started in the industry when the whole term smart didn't exist, see it as it became something, and now be in a space that's actually looking to figure out how to make it real and actually make money out of it,
Okay.
So that's...
keep us posted.
I will. There's
I
some cool stuff.
I'm still always looking for, and I know there won't be just some panacea, there won't be some eureka moment where we go, that's where all the fucking money from 5G is coming from.
Yeah, well, we know that.
Yeah, damn right. But any sort of use cases, I obviously a lot of journalism is sort of being skeptical and going, we've got incoming stuff from people like you and we're going, are they talking shit or not?
Yeah.
But I quite like writing stories about how, look, it turns out that this nascent market's growing like mad and it's a good opportunity for operators. I think that's part of trade press's job is to talk up commercial opportunities as well.
Well,
when we believe in them.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right, when they're credible. So, if anything comes up from CTS that I think is interesting that I can talk about, I'll bring it back. Because it's a whole private wireless approach that's, leveraging multiple different things. So, I'll keep you posted.
Cool.
Thank you, Scott.
Not at all. Anyway, so back to shitting on people. So my story, I wrote two stories, and I believe, Ian, you've recently written a story about it.
I wrote an opinionated thing today,
right, okay. Well,
Robert had already covered the actual news.
Right. So the news was that Huawei, I think I was organised enough to get the story up here. I'm normally not that organised.
Yeah, I know.
You've heard me berating myself on the pod, probably. So it's the Huawei Mate 60 Pro. So it's your mate. It's not just a phone, it's your mate.
What's up with that? This is branding.
Or maybe it was like, God, there was this absurd thing that the mayor of London
or maybe it's
came out with.
Isn't there a drink called Mathieu in this thing? I don't know.
Yeah.
Mathieu.
Well, we would have two T's.
The mayor of London is this bloke called Sadiq Khan, and he came up with this absurd marketing campaign. And it was to do... the premise of it is serious. It's to do with like perceived sexual harassment by men and women, obviously. But the strapline was, say mate to a mate. And what you're supposed to do is when you see a mate looking lecherously at a woman, you're supposed to go, mate, and just sort of talk him down from whatever his testosterone-y pedestal is. Anyway, it got the piss taken out of it because he had this mate with about 3 A's in it.
And he just had he lived in the UK?
It could be Slovak. It's a Slovak word that means you have.
Oh, does it?
It's the plural of you have in Slovak.
You would know.
Mathieu is pronounced.
So anyway, Huawei, in their wisdom, decided to call their phone mate.
So they're putting out a phone that looks like suspiciously.
And not just mate, but pro mate.
Yeah, mate.
Why does that look like an iPod?
Yeah, an old school iPod. So this is the back.
iPod.
I actually think they've got a camera module on it that's actually quite advanced. It's got a degree of optical zoom in it. Because most zoom is, digital zoom, because optical zoom actually requires
physical
depth, right? Moving about. So I think that's what that's all about. It's not, but it does look like the old disc of an iPod.
Yeah, so both the look of it and the name of it, they're just really not doing so well.
So they're not doing so well, but the point of it is they actually kept it really quiet. There was no launch event. There was no marketing at all that I could tell. But the fact is they haven't launched a significant phone with the Huawei brand. It should be noted that they successfully spun off a sub-brand called Honor. And the background of all of this is the US, your lot.
Yeah, me. Sure.
I blame you. I'm going to blame you personally.
That's fine.
Are basically going, let's see, this is my characterization of it. It started, this Huawei saga we've been covering for 2 or 3 years, haven't we?
Oh, yeah.
And it started with, let's say for the sake of argument, legitimate concerns about whether or not Huawei kit in our telephone networks could be appropriated by the Chinese government for espionage purposes. Okay, I still think we've never seen a smoking gun that proves that that's the case. But let's just say...
I don't think it was just that.
What else was it?
Intellectual property theft was one of the big US concerns.
Big US concerns. But that wasn't the pretext for banning Huawei
no, it
from
wasn't.
networks.
But it was certainly a pretext for some of the other legal actions.
It was definitely a grievance. Yeah. No, totally. And, and I think there is some evidence that there has been some fairly extensive IP theft over the years. Yeah, okay. For those only listening, Ian was like a duh look on his face. But anyway, so that's how it started. But then it just seems to have snowballed and metastasized such that now the way the US government is framing it is, and I wrote about this a little while back, they even declared a national emergency. And the national emergency is that China's getting a bit too good at technology, more or less. And we can't have that because we're the daddies. We've got all the best missiles and planes and shit. And we run the world. And we quite frankly, we're not in the habit of sharing that shit with anyone else. Now, I mean, I can understand that in a pure geopolitical way. I was chatting to my dad, who's a historian, and he was saying, 'twas ever thus. The UK, sort of 150 plus years ago, we were in that boat. When our empire covered the whole world. And, we didn't fancy it. And we probably tried some dirty tricks to keep the US probably in line.
I would think so.
But I don't think it's dirty tricks.
Well,
it might be, you could argue that, you should look at trade and whether you want countries to have access to technology in a certain way that's different from necessarily some other political considerations you might have, but it's not dirty tricks saying that you can't buy this technology because
I think it's an abuse.
It's not like it's not like they've done anything that's under the radar and nobody knows about, and it's like
I said dirty,
setting up
sneaky.
honey traps or
not sneaky. I think I just question the premise of the US. And I'm going to get into why it doesn't really matter what I think.
Yeah.
But I actually think it's damaging to the US what it's doing. But I question the premise of trying to freeze another country out of the global technological ecosystem on the grounds that we don't want them catching up with us. I just think that's a fucking dodgy premise. Myself. What do you think, Mary?
Well,
you're umming.
I am umming because I'm not sure if it's I don't want them to catch up with us. I guess is really my point because I don't. One of the things you've gone off about this a number of times, and the one thing that I always think about is there's no smoking gun associated with any of the intelligence issue, right?
Yeah, that they've shared with the public.
Which kind of actually makes me think good, right? Because the flip side of that is, okay, do we really want them, the U.S. government, sharing publicly?
No, that's a good point.
Why they don't want them? I mean, because in some ways, right, if it's supposed to be secret, well, good, they haven't actually leaked it and screwed it up. And gotten it out. I mean, from that point of view, I have actually been kind of happy about that. Putting the warning label on anything from China kind of thing. While I'm not terribly, I don't know enough of why the hell he put national emergency on that, and I don't have enough knowledge, but I can somewhat respect the idea of remember our balloons that flew over from China over the U.S. Here just last summer. I mean, that was a
bit weird.
Yeah, that was a little disturbing. And the capturing of so much data associated with that.
Yeah.
What's behind all of that? Just sitting here as a regular American, like what?
But
What exactly is the point there?
I agree. It's like your dad's right. 'Twas ever thus. It was like in the Cold War, that it was the Soviet Union they were worried about. And with good reason. It's a nuclear armed state. It's totalitarian.
Yeah.
It's a threat to the US. It's incredibly concerning. It's not a system that most people in America or Europe would want imposed on them.
No.
So I completely understand why they would want to do things like this. I don't like to be tribal about things, and I like to see things from one side or the other. But on things like democracy, I'm fairly tribal. It's not perfect. The US is definitely not perfect.
So better than...
The UK is definitely not perfect, but it's definitely better than something that's approaching what you've got in George Orwell novels.
Yeah, we can all agree. Totally. We can all agree that we'd rather live here or in the US than even somewhere like China, let alone North Korea. But that it doesn't necessarily follow from that because we disapprove of the way their country is run, that therefore gives us the green light and condones every other hostile act we do against them. I mean, what is the point of it ultimately? What are they trying to achieve from this, if not, Mary, to try and hold China back from its technological development?
Well, my view is that the technology is incredibly important these days. And, if you've got everybody's trying to use tech in one way or the other in a world that's very geopolitical, where people are trying to get influence on other parts of the world. It's hugely important. It's the way it's arguably the most important sector there is now. Networks are the way that we communicate. All this backdoor stuff, it sounds silly, but yeah, it's a valid concern, I think, that if you can bring down critical infrastructure or even use it just to snoop on other parts of the world and use it to influence the outcome of elections, whatever it might be, then I can understand why they'd be worried about them having... And on the chip side, I think the real concern on the chip side is it's military. Yeah. That stuff's military. That's the main reason that...
But China doesn't pose any military threat to the States.
Well, Taiwan...
I think it does.
Taiwan is potential, but then everyone potentially poses a military threat to the state. So again, I'm getting back to this. We know Taiwan's there, and we know that China has, since day one, insisted that Taiwan's part of China. And incidentally, funnily enough, I think I've said this on the pod before. About a couple of years ago at dinner with Huawei, I was brought up the Taiwan thing, and I was chatting to this Chinese woman who works for Huawei, very intelligent, very highly educated person, and she was going, "Well, the thing is, when Taiwan was formed around the time of the Chinese Civil War, and it was like the bolt hole for the Kuomintang, who are the losers of that civil war, that whole process was massively facilitated by the US, which I didn't know. So you can see why it kind of sticks in their throat a little bit.
The Chinese nationalists were allies of the US in the Second World War.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the reason.
Okay, and that's the Kuomintang.
And they were the upper force during the Second World War, and then the communists became more powerful afterwards.
Cool.
So they supported their allies, basically.
And let me stress, once you get into the history, it's so convoluted, and there's so many moving parts and interconnected things. And I'm not demonizing the US. I quite often have to apologize on this pod, don't I, Mary? So, I'm not having a go at
I know, yeah.
But they are. They're the top dogs, and they're also people that we tend to know a lot more about.
I'm going to unsheath myself. Is there another one?
He's going commando.
Another one? Yeah, oh God, yeah. Jeez.
How strong are these?
They're 6.5. I reckon you revert to the Hazy J, mate, or we're going to get no fucking sense out of you, or even less.
But you can still use the koozie, so have that.
It's very rude, very below the belt, I think.
I know. At least once a podcast.
It's just friendly digging.
So the one thing I want to jump in, though, a little bit, and sort of from a trade point of view.
Yeah.
So right now, the Chinese economy, while not dying, is under considerable constraints, right? And that concerns me purely from a trade balance point of view, right? We are one of the biggest, our imbalance with China, as the U.S. is enormous and has been for years. And their economy not doing so well. Just as a business person, I look at, while, recession is not a word anybody likes to hear, we've had some really bad years here. Between COVID and now, we've had an incredible...
And it hasn't really picked up at all. We're hoping for a bit of an uplift. It hasn't really happened,
but there's a lot of fear still, right? There's a lot of fear in the markets. There's not a lot of confidence.
We're just one quarter away from recession all the time.
Not the company that I work for today, but through some of the other activities that I'm a part of, some of the other organizations that I'm advising and others, there's a huge amount of concern. So the amount that's being invested, the amount that's being put into private equity, for example, venture capital, there's still real concerns and a lot more diligence that's being provided. And some of that, so you'll hear this whole chip discussion.
Yeah.
And, where is it coming from? And is that going to where's the supply chain concerns? Yeah. I mean, that's a huge issue. So
there's another thing which I was going to bring up later in this narrative, but
it's dangerous.
We're nothing if not fluid in our narratives on this podcast.
So the iPhone thing.
Yeah, the iPhone thing. So China's basically gone, and I'm amazed it took them this long to do it. They've basically gone, no one in the public sector can use an iPhone.
Yeah.
And, and then there's rumours that they're going to escalate that. And of course, we know that one big difference, although I don't think, again, the difference is as great as sometimes people make out, but one big difference between China and, for example, the UK or the US is that the government has its tentacles in everything.
Everything.
Yeah, and I believe that. I just think sometimes that's used as distraction for quite how much the public sector has its tentacles in our business here as well. But yeah, let's say it's more so. It's definitely an order of magnitude more. I won't deny that. And so if the CCP says you can't have it in government buildings, how long before you can't have it everywhere? And then obviously that's I think Apple's share price is already down a little bit. I saw a hilarious bit of CNN journalism where it said Apple has lost $200 billion. I fucking hate that. Yeah. Just because its share price gone. It hasn't lost anything. Yeah. It's only lost it if it then flogs all its shares.
Cap, right? I mean, it's just finish the sentence.
A silly number anyway. Now.
Same thing when Ronaldo at the Euro had the thing with the Coke bottle. Right?
That's right, yeah.
He moved it away and he said, drink water.
And then Coca-Cola lost billions.
Yeah, I'm like, no, they're just...
And it recovered it the next day.
That's a good headline, though.
There wasn't another headline saying Coca-Cola's all right again.
Clickbaity, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. It is
or my favourite journalistic cliche when they're... Yeah, bloody journalists. If only they're all as great as us.
Oh,
but I think they're doing this so Apple keeps making iPhones in China. I think they're seeing them.
Or it could just be. This is why I brought up. It could just be tit for tat. Yeah.
And I don't think they'll go as far as actually a ban on consumers using it because it would hurt China more. I think.
Well,
but you don't think they see Apple like slowly going to India and making this stuff in India? And then
I wouldn't assume that they're not already.
Vietnam's a big manufacturer.
If they've got any sense at all, they're going to do that anyway.
I think they're already. They could easily be doing
not
it
even
now.
for political reasons.
Oh no, they're doing it already.
China's just getting too expensive to make stuff in.
That's right. It's got to be just. It's got to be dispersed.
Yeah.
It's got to be.
I'm just saying, is it like a way of China telling Apple like slow down, like
it might be
a little bit more?
Well, you might have a point.
It's a negotiation tactic for sure.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, what are they going to pay for it? Because you never know what the deal is.
Yeah.
Because there's a deal.
But there's a huge amount of discontent in China at the moment. Like you were saying, I mean, I'm less worried about the whole Taiwan-China thing at the moment than I was because I think they've got so many problems at home. Although you never know, countries with problems at home sometimes do.
Well, that's kind of it's like the frightened wolf kind of thing.
They need to generate a distraction.
They're an export-driven economy that's all of a sudden trying to cut themselves off from certain parts of the world, all being cut off, and they don't have that. Even though everybody goes on about the Chinese middle class, they've still got a huge rural population that they that can't afford anything. So they can't move the stuff that they produce there and go, well, we can sell it domestically instead. And meanwhile, they're doing things like almost like people, if you want to cut off iPhones from people in China, where they're probably supporting Chinese apps and all sorts of things. Totally. And people are just going to be really pissed off about that. And they're already pissed off in China.
Exactly.
So I don't think they're in a good sort of, that's not a good bargaining thing for them to do.
It's all precarious, but you wouldn't put it past them.
No, I wouldn't.
Accelerating that anyway.
I wouldn't put anything past anyone at the moment.
Xi Jinping is not at the G20 in Delhi right now. It's the first time he hasn't attended.
Right, really? I didn't even know what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's his number 2. The president's there. And so that's got a lot of speculation.
But there's another tangent on all that. Like, there's been quite a lot of stuff in the press about a sort of BRICS bloc that are getting a little bit more confident and a bit bigger, and then
I don't know
if
we can really even call them BRICS anymore.
I think that's just such a nonsense term.
Yeah.
Just so people know, BRICS was originally stood for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa.
Yeah, all those countries have so much in common with one another.
Yeah, well, the thing they supposedly have in common, I mean, when people are doing these geopolitical segmentations, they're always very crude. But the point of this is
that they're poor.
Yeah.
Well, poor but very populous. I mean, that was basically what they're in common. Like, you can have BRICS with 2 eyes and lob Indonesia in there.
I mean, it was one of those opportunistic things, I think, by business people who thought, there's a lot of people in these countries. Let's try and, financial analysts, let's try and sell.
Because then they can just create a little silo.
Well, all of a sudden, I mean, what it really was, when they first came up with it was, oh my God, look at these huge, untapped, undeveloped markets.
Let's exploit them.
And let's just,
totally.
So that's when you had, before, what is India's
Nigeria
ARPU right now? Is it less than $2?
Yeah, Nigeria should be in there.
280 million people.
Nigeria's got a silly amount of people.
Yeah.
So they should be brinks. Anyway, as you say, it's expanding all the time. But that was part of what was going on. There's this, like, them inviting more people
Did you say
in.
brinks? With the Nigeria?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I didn't realise Nigeria was so populous.
So it's incredibly populous.
The thing the other day with it up as one of the
essentially
biggest
in
ones,
two cities.
Yeah, Nairobi just must
I'm
be...
sure it was like 100 million.
Have you ever been to Nairobi?
So they must have been
mental.
And
the two places that are closest to like a developing world mega city I've been to are Mexico City and Delhi. And they were both pretty hectic, and I imagine
I've been to those
right
two.
Up there, yeah.
Oh, Mexico went from the plane. Mexico just doesn't end.
Yeah,
carries on.
Mexico City, yeah.
It's over the.
It feels
hill.
like you can't get out of it when you're on a bus trying to leave. It's like...
Yeah, and then you go through favelas and all that sort of thing. Yeah. Another place that was like that was Shanghai. That time when we went to Wuzhen, and then it just kept going. And the high rises, they were still building high rises like several miles outside the city.
You're thinking if I was in the UK now, I'd be in Edinburgh.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? And it's just this endless.
It would have been.
It's like something out of Judge Dredd.
Yeah.
Blade Runner. Yeah.
Anyway,
totally
we digress. Yeah. So just staring it back.
The tourist board's going to be writing to us, you know.
Well, I was joking. I was out having a drink with Huawei earlier on this week, and I was chatting to our contact there, Cheryl. Hi, Cheryl, if you're listening, who's going back to Shenzhen. And she was always going, because I sort of say on the pod that I'd shit myself going to China a little bit, because I sometimes take the piss out of Xi Jinping.
I think you kind of want somebody to come after you now.
Well, I know, and and it sounds incredibly over dramatizing and self-aggrandizing, but and Cheryl was going, oh, come on. And I was like, look, seriously, joking aside, my biggest thing is not anything I've done personally. Of course, Xi Jinping doesn't keep a list of people who've taken a piss out of him on obscure podcasts.
Well, you say that.
But,
or does
say that. But no, but back to the core thing of like US versus China is, people start, citizens of countries that are belligerent towards each other start getting used as proxies sometimes. And it could just be bad luck. Like we had that thing with those Canadians when they were trying to lock up Meng from Huawei.
Yeah.
And, we had a thing, like my wife's Iranian, and so we felt a sort of degree of personal emotional investment in Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, who's this Anglo-Iranian woman who was imprisoned there for ages on supposed spying charges that seem to be bollocks.
You know the Canadians, one of them's very friendly with John, mentioning John again.
Yeah.
He's incredibly well connected, John, I have to say.
He fucking is. He really
Remind everybody who John is.
John Strand. Yeah. He watches this, so we don't need to...
He'll be loving this.
We're always bringing him up more than he should be brought up.
You do bring him up, but I'm just like,
he's very well
it's
connected.
Strand, but I'm going to say
he knows one of the Canadian guys. I think he's writing a book on the experience. I think he's writing a book if he's not already written it.
Yeah. So that's all. I just get a little bit twitchy when
I wonder who else
when
wrote a
you're
book.
Who else wrote a book?
Who else
someone
wrote a book?
in this room wrote a book. I think so.
The sub-best-selling identity crisis. Yeah, I think that's just it. When countries start getting more and more belligerent with each other, you just worry about collateral damage, that's all. But anyway, steering it back, this is a classic Telecoms.com podcast, massive tangent of about 15 or 20 minutes. Steering it back to this story, but it was relevant to frame the story. China, so they come out with this Mate phone, and the thing about it is Huawei's not really supposed to be able to do phones, at least not decent ones, because of all the stuff that we've just been talking about. America specifically been trying to block it, not just from getting hold of American intellectual property, which includes important companies like Applied Materials who make the gear that goes into chip fabs, but also putting diplomatic pressure on countries like Taiwan to get TSMC, which is the preeminent third-party chip maker in the world, stop them from working with them. And as we were saying earlier, so not only can they not get hold of Qualcomm, maybe they haven't used Qualcomm application processors for a while.
They don't need Qualcomm.
Which hold on a sec. Yeah. But they might have used their modems or someone's modems, because the whole modem situation
they compete against Qualcomm in that market.
But you say High Silicon makes 5G modems?
They have radio front end stuff in their phones.
Fair enough. We just don't know to what extent how good it is.
But it's highly regarded. High Silicon basically makes all its own silicon that goes into Huawei equipment, whether devices or...
Because I always understood the modem was harder. Like, with Apple, they're always trying to decouple themselves from Qualcomm, aren't they?
Yeah.
And they're actually very good at making their own application process, all the ones that go in the laptops and all that sort of thing. But they still hadn't got the hang of doing the modems.
No, I don't think that's...
So I just got the impression the modems was an order of magnitude harder.
The big issue for Huawei, the big thing that was most awkward for them was being cut off from the foundries that make cutting-edge chips.
Yeah, I think the chip is...
That was the big issue for them. Okay, it wasn't a lack of the design ability or...
I read Robert Clark's article. He said it's it's still 7 nanometer.
Yes,
at best.
It's a 7-nanometer chip.
On that Mate.
So that's what and that's what they
too
reckon.
big, I think, is what we're trying to say, right?
They said there's some potentially overheating issues.
I still think it's I haven't read the same stuff that Ian has on the modem side. I don't know if they have the capability.
It's not too big. Okay.
Well, it's a competitive thing. So the very smallest manufacturing process you can do now is 3 nanometers.
Those aren't available commercially.
No, but TSMC is doing them.
Yeah.
So let's say it's 4 or 5.
It's 5 at the moment.
That's what I thought it was.
The most
5.
advanced phones.
So in that case, it's only 1 generation behind, which isn't bad.
Yeah.
I mean, the other questions that go on. So the big chip fab in China is called SMIC, and the big question is whether SMIC A has just the capability full stop, and B can get the kit from people like Applied Materials, but they will have stockpiled a lot while America was ramping up this aggro. Basically, whether they have the capability to produce 7 nanometer at all, and B, to produce it in an economically viable way. So that's what comes down to what is the essence of this Mate 60 Pro story. Is it seems quite likely because Bloomberg partnered up with a company that specializes in what they call teardowns. Are you getting hold of breaking into bits of kit and working out what it's made of? And they did a teardown and went, yeah, this does look like SMIC 7 nanometer.
Yeah, but I was stunned that people were like, this Bloomberg revelation, oh, there's a 7 nanometer chip in it.
Yeah.
And like, everybody's like, oh my God, China's got self-sufficiency and it shows that Huawei's recovered. So SMIC showcased a 7 nanometer chip a year ago.
Right.
In July. I remember writing about it at the time. They can do that. The thing also, Applied Materials has got nothing to do with it. That's not and it's not actually US sanctions that are the problem for them. It's the lack of Dutch export licenses that the problem for SMIC.
For ASML.
Which allow ASML, which is a company that does lithography.
Tell us about ASML.
ASML does ultraviolet lithography.
Extreme.
Equipment. Well, it does all
EUV,
forms of,
but the EUV is the most cutting edge one.
Yeah,
isn't
so
it?
it does ultraviolet lithography, which is basically, it's almost like taking a photograph on the actual silicon wafer that imprints the.
It's almost like old school like film photography.
It's incredibly sophisticated, and it took them years to. And they cut ASML has this almost by accident. There's a really good book called
It got a monopoly, haven't they?
Chip War by Chris Miller about how they used to be part of Philips. They had things to do with TSMC in the past. The US lost a lot of its lithography expertise. It ended up going to ASML. But the idea that ASML has just done this off its own back, it's actually been a bit of an international collaboration to actually get the capability that it's got. But they're the only company in the world that has extreme ultraviolet lithography. There are other ones that do an older version called deep ultraviolet lithography. Canon does that in Japan and Nikon does that. They're the other two main ones. And EUV is the cutting edge stuff, and they have a 100% monopoly on the world.
Basically, if you're not working with ASML, you're not doing it.
But EUV, the misconception is that you need EUV technology to do 7 nanometer chips and smaller, 5 nanometer chips, and so they're most advanced stuff.
And you don't.
You don't, but you have to use something called double patterning when you're doing it, which basically makes it very hard to produce chips at scale and to do it economically. And therefore,
like double IPA.
And therefore, a Bloomberg dissection of a Huawei phone showing that there's a 7 nanometer chip inside it doesn't prove that Huawei can ship massive quantities of this Mate phone that includes 7 nanometer chips and do it in an economical way. They've definitely got it from SMIC because they can't buy from TSMC anymore.
Right.
Yeah. And SMIC has showed that it had this 7 nanometer capability, but they're probably they've been able to buy DUV equipment because the Dutch export restrictions on DUV didn't come into force
until... Which is the deep one versus the ultra.
So they didn't come into play until a few months ago.
Not quite the top end.
And they stockpiled a lot of DUV equipment. So they can do double patterning and produce 7 nanometer chips. But to be able to do that economically and produce this in the millions.
So what's the fear? I guess, what's the fear associated with, if they can do this, I guess, one, okay, gosh, it's not the best, but it is 7 millimeter or nanometer. What's the problem?
The fear is, and just to quickly finish off what Ian was saying, because I was leading up to that as well. a lot of stuff when you're talking about semiconductor manufacturing, there's a lot of it is about yield. So you've seen those pictures.
I totally get that, but I'm just asking the question about.
And so the big question that's unanswered, and then I'll lead up to yours. Well, but it is relevant.
Yield just means doing a lot of them at low cost.
But it is relevant because if SMIC can let's say do a massive 7-nanometer wafer, but not many of the chips on it are viable. Then that's one thing. But if you can do a great big wafer and most of them are viable, which is what TSMC
then
is,
it's
that's another
competitive
thing.
again. But to be able to do that, so this is why it's a big deal. To be able to do that economically, for a start, it means the reason Huawei's struggling is because its smartphone business collapsed.
Right.
So for a start, it would be a massive recovery for Huawei if they were able to ship this phone at scale. You'd expect there to be some kind of pickup in capability.
Sure.
And the other thing is that if they can do it that way, it would show they've got EUV capability. And EUV is the stuff that you use that's the thing the Americans don't want them to have access to because it's considered to be.
That's the fear.
Well, they don't want cutting edge technology because that's the stuff that goes into military applications as well and things like that. So
the broader answer to your question is which is why the framing that we were just banging on about a minute ago was important. Is the US thinks, and this is something that I wonder whether it's actually possible, it thinks it can sort of close Pandora's box or put the genie back in a bottle or whatever is the most appropriate sort of metaphor. It thinks it can completely exclude China from a certain strata, a certain sort of tranche of the technological world. And I'm going to just show you something and I'll describe it to our audience. There's a political cartoon published by the Global Times, which is basically heavily influenced by the Chinese Communist Party. The Global Times doesn't publish anything that the CCP doesn't approve. And it's a political cartoon that shows a Huawei car driving through a blockade, a roadblock, and they've written on it "Tech Chokehold." And then there's an exasperated-looking Uncle Sam by the side.
It's not attractive.
It's not subtle.
Sam.
It's not subtle, is it? But
this is very helpful to now understand.
So that is the framing. From a Chinese point of view, it's them basically going up yours.
But I thought the mainstream press misinterpreted it. Because I thought there was a lot of stuff in the press going around earlier in the week from people like Bloomberg who did the teardown and some analysts going, it shows that China's working towards self-sufficiency and that Huawei's kind of back. And I just thought, it doesn't show anything of the sort. It shows they're using an SMIC chip that was produced a year ago in one phone.
Right.
That they're not started selling. This is something they've shown off to some journalists at the time when a few big events were going on, like G20.
Yeah. It's symbolic rather than substantial.
Fuck you, America kind of thing. Look what we can do.
That's why when they asked Huawei, how did you do this? They kind of evasive. And
I was out.
We didn't do anything, actually.
I mean, I was out with them on Tuesday and, everything was off the record, so I'm not going to name any individuals. But I asked a few people, I was like, what's going on? And they went, honestly, I haven't got a clue, and I believe them. I don't think they were just keeping their cards close to their chest. I think this has been a strategic thing happening very much
while G20 is going on
at a Chinese level. And to be fair to China, to be fair to Huawei, it's not like they made a big noise about it. But then when you suddenly see things like the Global Times have got these political, satirical cartoons queued up, you can tell. I mean, Mary, you know this better than us. You're a professional marketer. This isn't coincidence, is it? This is coordinated.
No, I mean, and they want. I mean, go further than that, right? They're going to publish an article or a cartoon like that, and they've made this announcement during the G20, and they're specifically, giving the bird to the U.S., right?
Mm. And they're doing the iPhone thing at the same time.
And they're doing the iPhone at the same thing. What I always come to is, what's their end game? Because they know that they're handing indicators to the market to say, this means potentially this.
International sympathy, maybe?
I don't know. I mean, to who? It's the market doesn't care, as in the street doesn't care. If the market itself, as in the consumer, right, starts buying these phones, then
I don't think they're going to make them available outside China.
Yeah, well,
they probably. I mean, we don't even know.
We don't.
There were all these stories how they sold out, but they might only have 5.
I just find it fascinating. Why? What is that? To me, is always the interesting question. What's the end game?
The other thing is like, if they let's say they can. I mean, I'd be very surprised because this is just from talking to other people who actually know about semiconductors. I don't know enough, but I've spent a lot of time over the last year trying to talk to people about things like EUV, and they all think that it's because it's so complicated and it took ASML. It's almost an accident that ASML has that and nobody else does,
Sure.
and Canon and Nikon don't. And it's very, very the experts say it would take China years to have the same capability. So it'd be a big surprise if they have EUV capability on a domestic level. which means that to produce these 7-nanometer chips at scale and do it economically because of the yield issue that Scott was talking about is going to be incredibly difficult. If they could, then great. But if they can't, then people are going to go out and buy. I mean, it's not as though there's a shortage of other Chinese handsets for Chinese consumers to go and buy anyway these days. You can go and get Oppo stuff and Xiaomi.
Why did Bloomberg do the teardown to begin with?
Well, I think the teardown was good.
It's totally
you want to do a teardown. I think the teardown's great.
They did a teardown of this, right?
Yeah.
So again, if you've already got Xiaomi and you've already got some of these in Oppo,
so they did it.
All of
they
those?
did it to inform.
Well, they probably did it because Huawei went, do a teardown of this because you'll find it really interesting.
Yeah, see, I mean, again,
it could have been that. It could have been that. But even if they didn't, it's been one of the reasons we're bringing it up. It's been by far the most read story on Telecoms.com.
Isn't it fascinating?
There's just massive interest in this.
Yeah, well, and
it's because it informs this broader US versus China.
It wasn't our most read story. Our most read story was T-Mobile buying US Cellular.
Right, which they haven't done.
Which they haven't done, but they talked about, which Mike covered. But the stuff
was he early on it?
I don't know if he was early on, but he got loads of traffic. I mean, the stuff that the T-Mobile's doing at the moment, some of the Spectrum stuff gets ridiculous traffic at the moment. It always makes me feel slightly inadequate when I see some of Mike's things. Because a lot of our readers are in the US, obviously, and reading.
Yeah, Mike covers a lot of the US. Yeah.
But people are much more interested in that. Because I think the trouble with this is that Bloomberg's been doing the teardown, and I'm coming to it, and I'm like, well, what am I going to do? Because they've already done the teardown, and they've done the.
Yeah, see, I've got less pride. I'll take whatever journalistic reads I can get.
So I can only come at it and be an opinionated moron.
Yeah, welcome to my world, Ian.
God. I think it's just interesting to look at the signs of the very convenient teardown, finding the 7mm or nanometer, having the announcement be this week. Just all of these things. What's the end game? Because
so it's
clearly,
funny the way Bloomberg framed it, and they've got a writer who I don't know, but I've bumped into because he's been a tech journalist forever called Vlad Savov, and he's now at Bloomberg. Right? Yeah, great name.
Totally.
I'm surprised he gets away with a name like that in the States at the moment.
Hail people on stakes in Romania.
No, Vlad, the tech journalist, doesn't have quite the same ring to it, does it?
No.
But he used to be like at Engadget and stuff. He's a very experienced tech journalist. And he was one of the people who did this for Bloomberg. And the way they framed it is that they sort of smuggled this thing out of China.
Okay.
Now, if we take it at face value, that's fine. I mean, the journalistic stuff, I thought, yeah, totally.
Oh, sure.
I mean, to be the only people who've actually got hold of it and to have got a partner who has the expertise to
I'd have done it in a
take it to pieces.
Totally get it.
But anyway, I actually think Ian and I, we do agree in that it's symbolic. It's not commercially significant, this. Yeah. But it enables cartoons like the one I showed you. It enables them to go up yours, America, with respect to your question of, what's the big picture?
What's the end game?
What's the end game? I think, they've got useful idiots like me who are sympathetic towards them to a certain degree, just because I think, and I'll go off, if you just indulge me, I'll go off on my little segue of why I actually don't think this serves American interests. Because I think the US has got to a stage now where it's throwing its weight around so much in things like this, things like freezing Russian assets when they invaded Ukraine, which you could argue, well, Russians are the baddies, everything's fair game. But because the US is the keeper of the global reserve currency, once it starts exploiting that position to freeze assets just because they happen to be denominated in dollars, then you're going to get other people thinking, okay, so if we piss off the Yanks, are they going to freeze our shit as well? The problem is I think America is overextending itself and it's alienating too many people, which is where this BRICS stuff comes up. And, America... Obviously, I'd rather, if anyone's got to be the world's top dog, I'd rather it was America than China. I'd rather it was America than Russia. I'd rather it was America than most places, for all its sort of inefficiencies and flaws and having.
I'd rather it was the UK. We should still rule the world.
There you go.
Well, there we go.
Britannia.
I reckon we should
we were born about 200 years too late, weren't we? But I think it's actually sabotaging itself. I think it's sticking its neck out too far and it's alienating too many people. And in that way, it's playing into China's hands. This is what I think, to your question, what I think China's doing. It's a sympathy game. And they're basically going, well, look, we've tried this. America's tried to shit on us. This is our little effort. And look at them now. America's probably going to overreact. I mean, to take it in a slightly macabre direction, do you remember the accepted rationale behind 9/11, which was that Osama bin Laden thought that by doing something as atrocious as that, he would force America to overreact. And then we got Iraq and we got Afghanistan and all that sort of thing. And we, in hindsight, obviously 20 years hindsight, we can say that didn't necessarily go that well for the States, at least in terms of just the amount of money it blew on fuck all. And I just wonder whether America's making that mistake again. It's overreacting. It's perceiving a perfectly credible, legitimate geopolitical threat in China, but it's just overdoing the Team America World Police thing. Have you ever seen that film? Yeah, it's just overdoing that fuck yeah stuff. And, you know, I don't know, and I don't know if it's going to end that well for the States, let alone everyone else.
I think I agree with you on the reaction to 9/11, totally. I think they got that, looking back on it now. It's easy to say in hindsight, isn't it? But, I mean, they've pulled out of Afghanistan and the Taliban are back again. Iraq was a disaster. And probably,
so the whole thing is that's
you know,
so the broader thing I think is a lack of subtlety.
Meanwhile, you have other terrorist groups that could probably do the same thing again. So it's not really got them anywhere. But I think on geopolitics is an awkward one, the way countries sort of play off against each other. I think
totally.
You know, it's not the same as dealing with a terrorist organisation. It's different, and like your dad made a good point. It's been going on forever. It's always that way, and I don't think this is anything especially new, really. I think there's always been.
And I wonder what the end game is of the sanctions. Further to Mary's point, I mean, are they going to try and keep sort of China suppressed indefinitely? I just don't see how that's possible.
For me, the end game of just this particular week's play. Yeah. Right. This hand that they're playing right now. Right. What are the cards really? What's the purpose of them? You know, and that's really, you know, that's why I think this is so interesting. This particular story, this particular time, the teardown of this smuggled out device. It's just all very convenient. Now
smuggled out.
Yeah, you know, and so
and you're someone who knows about marketing and messaging at a high level. So
and then that cartoon, and then asking the question, all right, who exactly are they saying is going to feel badly for them? What they need is
do you reckon they wrote that headline before it was smuggled out?
It could have been. Well, I mean, I've got to show you too another thing that I got from my previous story, which was a tweet. It also coincided with a senior American diplomat called Gina Raimondo going over there. And
Gina Raimondo, isn't she involved in Open RAN?
Someone had queued this up within seconds of the thing coming out. And I think it says something like...
I'm Raimondo. This time I endorse Huawei. Chinese parody ad of Huawei Mate 60 Pro, which just released with 100% Chinese-made components. Yeah. Mate 60 or Mate 60 debuted just as U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo visited China.
So this was a tweet where someone had just spliced together the marketing for the Mate 60 Pro with a portrait of Raimondo. Anyway, so. You're completely right, Mary. This is obviously part of a much bigger strategic thing.
Exactly. There's a bigger play here.
And I've got to say, I mean, I'm going to move it on because I've done my usual thing of letting the first thing go on far too long, and we've only got about 30 minutes or so left. I would say I deeply regret all the general fuckery. I just wish everyone would just calm down and de-escalate and just let everyone go on with making money and going on holidays and getting pissed at the weekend and just normal,
as I say many times
stuff.
When listening to the pod, the two of you should just be. And Pierre taking care of the whole thing should just be managing all diplomatic relations globally over some beers and all be fine.
And the only thing I got to say...
How do you realise that? And other people need
I know,
to as well.
I do, man. Every time. I'm like, they should just be sorting all this out.
The long campaign for us to be world president starts here. But then on the flip side, from a professional point of view...
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
Oi.
Ray Winstead.
Yeah. But I call you shit.
Boy, Biden, watch your fucking
Daddy
manners.
Ping.
Yeah.
Daddy Ping.
But on the flip side, from a professional point of view, if they didn't do this, we wouldn't have all this cool shit to
there
write
you
about
go, exactly.
and pontificate about on the pod. So there we are. All right, I'll put a full stop in it there. What is the next thing we're going to chat about? I'm going to hand over to Ian, not least because I've been doing far too much talking. There's lots of stuff going on with Open RAN. Were you laughing? Did he give you a look of like...
oh, God, I'm going to talk now?
Oh, right. I thought
let's talk
about after having had a couple of rock doves and what's this one? Sparkbird.
Sparkbird, yeah. Just steer clear of the wingspan, mate. I'll fuck you up.
So Open RAN.
Open RAN. So you've been writing a lot about Open RAN. I've written a bit, but I'm going to defer to you on this. What's the Open RAN angle at the moment?
The Open RAN angle at the moment is that it's not been a very good year for Open RAN, really, I think. Mm-hmm. I think that's the broad thing. It's not actually been a very good year for RAN this year so far. So,
or telecoms, for that matter.
It's not been a very good year for telecoms.
But we've still got a job.
And the RAN market is quite, like the projections are quite down for what the year is going to look like. And Ericsson's, which is obviously all RAN really, apart from some stuff that it does with Vonage and a couple of bits of software that they can't sell. It's basically,
get rid of.
It's basically all RAN, and their results were quite badly down in the first half. And then Nokia was doing okay, I think, because of work in India, but basically saying the whole year is not quite going to be as good as we thought it
India's
was.
propping up the sort of
India's
Ericsson
propping up.
and Nokia
So the main reason is that there was apparently a lot of stockpiling going on, during those years of COVID.
Well, and supply chain.
And supply chain problems.
I mean,
people were,
absolutely.
Yep,
if you could get it, you bought it, and you put it on the shelf.
And the chip thing, let's not forget, it's been going on for years, isn't it?
The chip thing is one thing, but just about if there is a piece of kit that you needed to have and you knew you needed to have it, and that's across everything that I talk to.
That's interesting.
Everything.
So
in
people
every
are
sector.
Yeah.
People are abandoning the just-in-time and they're stockpiling a
from
lot more.
automobiles to just sheer manufacturing to.
And why is that?
Telecoms.
Is that because of the pandemic primarily?
Oh yeah,
right.
I mean, we personally had stuff stuck in one of those ships that was parked off at the Chesapeake Bay. We could probably have seen the unit that had our. We couldn't get it.
Yeah.
So no, I mean it's
been tough.
It's been very difficult.
And then they've cut spending as well. The big US carriers, which I think is where most of the profits are for people like Ericsson, Nokia.
Yeah, because I'll tell you, the unit pricing in India is not helping them. No, there's no way it can be.
Yeah.
Right? They may be moving.
No, you're totally right.
But they're not getting
a fraction of
it.
Yeah, and they admit that they do.
Yeah, they have to.
Calls,
yeah,
but the market's not good. And then so Open RAN was obviously going to be affected because it's part of the broader RAN market, but. I think one of the problems, there's other issues that Open RAN's having, I think, and some of the smaller, one of the ideas of Open RAN is that it was sort of voice specialists and, smaller companies who focused on one particular area and
some of them aren't doing. What are they?
And they're not doing very well. So we have the two most prominent ones, I think, or the three most prominent ones, very much on the software side, because it gets made out to be a software thing, were all US companies. They were... They used to be the sort of the three names that always got thrown out were Altiostar, Mavenir, and Parallel Wireless.
Yeah,
and they've
Parallel had a wobble a while.
They've all had a pretty disastrous last sort of couple of years. I mean, Parallel ended up, depending on who you listen to in terms of the numbers, but they sort of laid off anywhere between kind of 30 and 50% of their employee base, and then you don't really hear very much about them anymore. Actually,
No.
I mean, they are still going, and I think Mike. Like Reading did a story where he'd spoken to Steve Papper, who's the CEO, but they're clearly just not where they were. They were viewed as one of the kind of contenders for doing stuff with people like Vodafone in the UK. They were involved with trials with them and in Ireland, and they don't really show up anywhere these days. Nobody I know is talking about them. Altiostar got bought by Rakuten,
right?
And
we know the story on them.
Yeah, and so they
Rakuten's not having a great time either.
No,
they have two roles within Rakuten. They provide the software for Rakuten's own network in Japan, which still only has about 5 million subscribers.
It's only about that big.
In a market where
KDDI.
the market leader's got 85 million.
Yeah.
And then the other role is to actually sell that software to other carriers in the world through Rakuten Symphony. Well, they're tiny. I mean, their revenues are in the sort of 100 million range,
which is
for
probably
a 6
generous.
month period.
Yeah.
Well, they put their addressable market a few years ago in 2022 at something like 100 billion, and they're selling 100 million worth of kit products in a 6 month period.
Yeah.
And their sales went down. It's been quite choppy as it would be as a startup. You win a deal and it can boost things, and then it can be a bad quarter. But the year-on-year comparison doesn't look good for the first 6 months compared with last year. And then I think the whole thing's just, there are all these issues I think that still haven't been resolved to do with systems integration's a big one. The suitability of the specs for massive MIMO is something that I didn't even know that much about until earlier this year, and then wrote a big piece on it a few weeks ago that apparently it seems the ORAN Alliance spec for 7.2x, that it's called the Open Fronthaul spec, just doesn't really work for massive MIMO, and it was
Sounds like an issue.
Well, it was very much made out when you talked to smaller companies about it. They were like, "Oh, that's just Ericsson's line." It's very much Ericsson complaining about it.
Talking point.
And then when I dug into it a bit more, it wasn't just Ericsson. Like Qualcomm was raising issues. Orange, very much more important because it's a service provider, was raising concerns. So they've now come out with these workarounds to improve it, but there's big compromises involved in what they're doing that almost add cost back in and make it more difficult to actually use different equipment.
Which is so completely contradictory to its entire premise to begin with.
Of course, the entire purpose was you use a different radio from the baseband person. And and if you're in a situation where interoperability between the two of them becomes more difficult because of that massive MIMO. And by the way, massive MIMO a few years ago was viewed as this thing, we might need it in city centres or where there's a lot of traffic. Now, apparently, it just shows up everywhere in RFPs. I think T-Mobile Netherlands has like 70% of its network is based on massive MIMO or something. So in more densely populated countries, you're going to use it widely. And it's probably, so it's unsuitability.
I always thought it was just baked into like the premise of 5G. I always thought of massive MIMO as just a fatter pipe.
32TR and 64TR, which are the ones that are sort of considered massive MIMO, were never envisaged as going everywhere back in the early days of 5G.
But it's still a part of the standard.
Yeah.
That's the key, right? The Overland Alliance was never a standards body.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a specs body.
So
Ian and I have agonized over standards and
but I mean,
specifications.
legitimately, and this is where I've always had a real issue with when it came out of the gate and the premise of it. I thought, if this is really serious, why is this not a subheading of what's happening in 3GPP?
Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
If this was really something that was going to provide efficiency, because while 3GPP has had some long-standing, we know the players that are sitting at those tables, we know what their desires are, but they also know the benefit of the standard because it gives them the kind of yield that they want to have, and they can build at scale. It's not against their interest to be building something that they know the guy next door is going to build at the same exact standard, right? It's part of what they do. So to build something to define something in a separate organization by effectively the same players that are in 3GPP, plus a few that are teeny that don't have enough voice.
Yeah.
Because that's what this is about, is that those smaller players didn't have enough weight inside of 3GPP and said, okay, let's figure out how do we create another little community. Oh, but by the way, we don't really have a standards-making activity. So we're going to come up with these specs that are guidelines.
And try and nudge it. It's a little bit like in, like in political processes where you get fringe parties that are never going to
win, but they're trying to influence the narrative.
Yeah.
So the problem with me is the philosophy of it is this idea, because it's become very religious, that we have to have
which I find a fruitless
for some
activity.
people, not everybody, but like you can go as granular as you want on openness. At some point, some things have to be linked together.
But you've made a very good point in the past couple
potentially.
podcasts.
Maybe they don't, but maybe they do. But at the end of the day, if it becomes so difficult to divorce the radio unit from the baseband unit, and when you're trying to combine two separate players, that it's very technically challenging and it's going to be more expensive, then why would you do it? You just go. It's like buying, it's like having the same wheel
having a
from
Google
from
and an Amazon. Two like little voice speakers, right? And you're trying to make them both work in your house. And you're like, I'm never going to do this.
Because the incentives are all fucked up.
Or maybe it's just a recognition that some things have to go together. You buy a Tesla and the wheels are made by Tesla. And if you take a Volkswagen wheel off and try to put it on, it isn't going to work. And it's like, I just feel sometimes this openness thing is it's become such a religious thing for some people that they're trying to, they're tying themselves in knots to get to a situation they're probably never going to get to.
And I understand, for a long time in the technology industry, right, we've really gone with open application, right, and APIs. So how do you have an opportunity to have integration while at the same time you are keeping your stuff private and it's still intellectually yours, but I want to be able to integrate with you. So the whole idea of an API came about because of that. And the whole idea of having an open-sourced approach to things. There's a great deal that's been put in the technology community around the term open. I think they just simply ran on top of that to essentially leverage that whole concept. But, this is where I get really frustrated. I mean, look, we have not had significant growth in the core business of the mobile operators since what, 2017? 2016.
You're talking about operators,
CSPs, right? Bottom line, where have they had actual growth, where there's still penetration? So we're talking about, that long ago. And in that point, we were still in LTE. We're talking about 5G, but we had good core networks.
Definitely been no uptick in LTE at all.
No. And so these same players trying to get into the Open RAN and create Open RAN, this was so apparent to me, in some of the roles that I had and what was happening in the industry. All these operators can do right now is cut cost.
Yeah.
That's it.
Exactly, and that's another thing. I mean, we won't get down that rabbit hole, but Ian and I talk about it a lot. The constant sort of asset stripping
But they have no other choice. So why are they? If this is not working?
Well, I've got an answer to that. It's going to sound like I'm picking on you because you're.
Is it the Americans?
You're American. Well, it is because it's actually related to segment one. I mean, this is part of it. I mean, Ian, by all means, butt in and tell me I'm oversimplifying.
No, because I was going to say this. Probably what I was going to say.
Well, you elaborate.
Because then we are really wrong.
I'll do the top line and Ian can drill down on it as he sees fit. I mean, banning Huawei from... So the first segment was more about smartphones, but actually I think Huawei has always been more significant in networks than in devices.
I understand.
Yeah.
Well, that's always been the case.
Yeah. And banning them from networks has just left a commercial duopoly for most people of Ericsson and Nokia.
Yeah.
And they're both lovely.
Actually, worse than that. Because I think, and this ties to the, I think one of the reasons there was such a huge interest in Open RAN, and an analyst made this point interestingly at a thing that we were both at, but I can't say who it was because he didn't want to be quoted on it. But it's known anyways. Nokia was in a really bad position a few years ago, back in 2019.
That's true. Yeah.
Their 5G business, they made some questionable decisions, and the 5G business was not perceived to be competitive. And this was the problem, is that this is around about the same time when they were started to talk about, countries like the UK started to talk about banning Huawei.
Yeah.
So immediately what organisations like Vodafone thought, which is already quite heavily reliant on Ericsson, it was already at about 55% of its network, I think it's RAN, was, well, if we lose Huawei, and we're not particularly happy with Nokia anyway, in fact they were moving their network away from that, we're basically in a position where we're completely dependent on this Swedish supplier. Nothing wrong with it being Swedish, but you don't want to have one organisation.
So it was really just an answer to that.
And I think that was one of the reasons why Open RAN seemed like an attractive way to go.
And it's quite US driven.
This idea that if you open those interfaces between different areas, and therefore a specialist that was cut out of the deal before because they didn't have an end-to-end capability can slot in and link to something that somebody else is doing elsewhere on the site, then you might foment competition through smaller companies that can focus all their R&D resources. Well, there's that as well. But let's just present, like, whether they're in the standards bodies or not, that you allow smaller companies and startups that really never had a role before because you had to buy everything from the same company.
Yeah.
They're in a situation where they can compete. And I get that. I totally get that premise.
Of course.
The problem is that it's just not worked out that way at all.
No.
I mean, the market now, if you look at it, and this is something that I wrote about this week, what Vodafone's doing. Vodafone's big plan in the UK was to, they knew they were going to lose Huawei, which is, I think, when I went to an update in 2019, and Scott Petty was then the Vodafone, he's now the CTO of the whole group, but he was then the CTO of Vodafone UK. Yeah. He was very, very transparent about who supplies what and what the breakdown is on the network side. And it was, I can't remember the numbers exactly, but it's something like 56% Ericsson, 32% Huawei, and then the rest Nokia
and a lot of it was
London,
Wales and the West Country.
Yeah, and they're moving.
I'm curious how that works. But they go, let's give the Welsh the fucking Huawei.
Well, it's more extensive than that. I mean, it's big. It's a third of the network, and it's an 18,000 site network. It's basically 6,000 sites based on that breakdown. They're phasing Nokia out because they felt that Ericsson was better, and then they had the Open RAN plan that was announced back in 2021 when they came out with all the suppliers was, we will replace 2,500 sites with Open RAN. They have until the end of 2027 to do it under government rules. But it's not just doing that. They have to get rid of the rest of the Huawei estate.
Yeah.
And they've been very, very coy about what they're doing with the other, let's say it's about 3,500 sites based on those numbers that Scott Petty shared. They've been very, very sort of, whenever I've tried to pick on this, and it's not been widely reported on, the suggestion, the hint that was always given to me is that if the 2,500 site stuff works out well, then we could go further. And then they put out this release last week, which Scott,
which
you guys probably covered, where they've finally got on with doing the actual commercial rollout. So this is 2 years' time. What they've been doing in 2 years is testing 16 sites in Torquay.
And that was kind of a point.
16 sites in Torquay, so they haven't started the commercial rollout.
I noticed, Ian, I think I was the first to this. I was the first to this headline. In fact, I think even Ray, you remember Ray?
Did you quote Faulty Towers immediately?
And I said, and I think when they first started testing this stuff out in Torquay, I said, Vodafone's hoping it won't have faulty towers. And I even got a little email from Ray going, fair enough, because Ray loves a pun and a...
Yeah.
But I did make the point in my recent reporting, God, it's taken them a while.
It's taken them 2 years. So this commercial launch has kicked off, but then I looked at the press release that they put out, and there's a really interesting statement that by the end of 2027, we'll have at least 2,500 sites on Open RAN. Well, there's a big gap between 2,500 and 6,000 Huawei sites. And I did a bit of digging around, and what it seems, depending on who you talk to, but these are people pretty close to the matter, is that all that work, the other 3,500 sites, has either gone and been dealt with by Ericsson already,
right,
or it's being dealt with by Ericsson already, or certainly they're very, very involved in dealing with those sites, and therefore the role for Open RAN that might be there in that rest of the Huawei estate is incredibly small.
Oh, really?
Now, yeah,
that's interesting. I hadn't.
That was the scoop.
Right. Okay. Sorry, I haven't been reading your shit enough.
And
I apologise.
And therefore, now, okay, you could use Ericsson, and there's no reason why you could use Ericsson and not be Open RAN. Ericsson could make Open RAN equipment available as well, but it hasn't done so far. It's perceived to be not an Open RAN player.
Well, it's not in its interests.
And they have been very, very active in the ORAN Alliance on this whole massive MIMO topic. They pushed it.
Yeah.
But this is June. This was signed off. These modifications. So no equipment will be in the market now that supports that. So here's the other problem that Vodafone's got on its 2,500 site deployment. It's doing it mainly with Samsung. Samsung is the main supplier. Now, the whole premise of Open RAN is that the whole original premise of Open RAN is that you buy your radios separately from who you're buying your baseband equipment from. Well, Samsung's doing both. And when they first put their announcement out in 2021, and the list of vendors turned up, NEC was on the list as a massive MIMO supplier as well, implying that Samsung software would power not only its own radios, but NEC's radios.
Right.
When they put the announcement out last week, every other vendor was named, except somehow NEC had gone missing from the list. And it wasn't on there anymore, implying that every single radio and baseband unit they'll take will be from Samsung, which is exactly what you do in a traditional network.
And this has been something, I know you listen to...
And maybe that'll change, but...
This has been something Ian's been ringing alarm bells about from day one, which is, it's all very well having Open RAN, but presumably producing this very complicated RAN technical environment... for all the open standards and the open interfaces you might have, still presents a systems integration challenge.
Always.
So it might be easier just to get one fucker to do it all.
Yeah.
And then how are you that much better off than going all in with Ericsson, which has been something you've been saying for at least a couple of years.
And the other thing is that the systems integrator, whether you do it yourself, which means, by the way, taking on a lot of staff to do systems integration when you would never have done that before, or you do it through a systems integrator like Tech Mahindra, or then what's the difference between Tech Mahindra and Ericsson?
And just doing it all from one.
Tech Mahindra's in charge of the rollout, or Rakuten Symphony's in charge of the rollout, and they're your choke point, basically.
So do we think, Ian, this is why, like something I wrote last week, Deloro numbers about they produced something about Open RAN revenue growth.
Yeah.
And Deloro, like all analyst places, they always have to work out how much shit they're going to give away for free rather than getting people to pay for all their data. But they gave me this little bar chart that said Open RAN revenue growth 2021 around about 150%, 2022 around about 140%, 2023 less than 20%, which could be zero.
But those Deloro numbers, a lot of that's to do with the RAN market itself at the moment.
Yeah, but that was so. But that's what. Sorry.
So there's another analyst.
I was wondering whether what you were just talking about you think is a contributor to
that. Yes, I think. I mean, okay. There's another analyst company called Omdia that you know, and
I've heard of them.
And
they're here in this building.
And they're really good. They're really good.
They are very good.
So their forecast this year is, and I think I actually think their RAN forecasting is really good. They're spot bang on the money. But they think, I'm not just saying that because it's a sister company. I do think they're very good.
Yeah, they're very good.
But they think Open RAN will be 7% of the market this year, compared with 6% last year. So its market share is going up.
Growth.
But the thing is, you can call something Open RAN in name, like Samsung will be doing on this Vodafone UK, and no doubt some of the stuff it's doing in North America with people like AT&T and Verizon. But if all the baseband and radios are coming from the same guys, and they're struggling for some reason to integrate NEC, and if they weren't, then why isn't NEC in that announcement that went out the other week? Because that's the sort of thing you want to show off as an Open RAN example. Then what's the difference? Basically, what's the difference?
And then also, and I know this is something you wrote about, and I covered it as well, but I like to think I linked back to you because, I don't mind linking back to you. I'll credit where it's due. If you extrapolate the current rate of growth, even if we get to 6G, where people might go, maybe Open RAN will really kick ass at 6G, it's still going to be the minority, like about a third of the market by the time we get to the end of this decade.
Yeah.
But at the current rate of progression. So,
do you know, I think one of the big problems for it, though, is actually getting back to something Neil McRae said back in his days at BT. Because he made the really good point that I've spent a lot of time at BT trying to phase out too many suppliers and go down to a smaller number.
Yeah, now suddenly we're trying
and
to
if you start bringing back in people, then you usually end up paying more. It's a little bit like, these days people go, like my parents, for example, because I always use them as an example because they're basically tech laggards.
Yeah.
But they're now like converged customers, as you call it. They take their broadband and mobile and actually a couple of other things as well from some... It's called Utility Warehouse.
Yeah.
And the Utility Warehouse is kind of like a systems integrator in a way that
it's a little clearinghouse for a bunch of different things wholesale, and then resells it.
And my dad's like, look how good this is.
That.
We spend this much money, and if we bought all these things separately, it cost us this much, and it's brilliant just to get it all wrapped up.
Yep.
And then he's like, yeah, when things go wrong, it can be a bit awkward because they sort of blame somebody else, and it takes a while to sort out. So that's the trade-off.
Always.
But basically, he's spending less. If you want to get everything from somebody else, as opposed to just saying, well, let's just get the radio. Like when Samsung comes along and goes, well, you buy your baseband from us. If you get your radios from us as well, we'll do you a deal. It's like a Whopper deal, where you get your big Coke as well at the same time. Get a big Coke as well, and the Coke's only going to cost you like £1.
This is pricing 101.
It's like, what if you...
Yeah, or another
pricing
analogy.
101. I mean, it's just simple as that.
Another analogy that springs to mind, we often lament, Mary, you've been to visit me up in Hitchin. I live in a medium-sized market town, and you like to think of this utopia if you go around and there's lots of independent shops and it's all really cute, and someone's making fucking bread and someone else is doing cute little bits of jewellery or whatever. But we always end up going to Sainsbury's because it's just all there.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a relevant analogy to this, but it just sprang to mind.
Yeah.
And this is why even in Hitchin, it's now all chain like Starbucks and this, that and the other. It's just a fact of economic life. Listen, we're like about 10 minutes left, and we want to at least briefly mention the thing that Mary flagged up. Feels a bit rude. Not to at least bring it up at all. I just want to say one thing though quickly that I meant to say earlier and I forgot. And on that Huawei story, my final paragraph goes as follows, and I'm going to...
Back to Huawei.
Yeah, but I'm going to tell you because sometimes I call out trolls in the comments section.
Yes, you do.
And I've got one here. So my final paragraph was, given the questionable... And this is something I've telegraphed on this pod. Given the questionable too much of that 8% beer kicking in there. Questionable justification the US has for using its preeminent economic power to try to ensure no one else catches up with it. It's hard to begrudge China this win, and I'm sort of superficial win, propaganda win. But even if SMIC can manufacture 7-nanometer chips at industrial scale, it will be incredibly difficult to close the 5-year head start that chip makers under some degree of US control have over it. And then this guy who claims to be Brian Williams goes...
Who's Brian Williams?
Well, no one, just a commentator. Just some random...
It's actually he's a commentator.
Brian Williams. I was like, the great Brian Williams.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I say
the US is on NBC.
He claims to be Brian Williams because, as you'll see from what I'm reading out, he's very pro-China. Huh? So that's what I mean. Why is he Brian Williams and not something with lots of X's?
He should really be called Xi Jinping.
There we go. So he quotes me saying it'll be incredibly difficult to close the 5-year gap. And then, close quote, typical Western arrogance. Despite pointing out this is an incredible achievement, you still try to besmirch the Chinese people. Well, when will you stop being a racist?
Oh, that's brilliant. I love that. And, that's bloody brilliant, Brian. You've summed up the world at the moment.
And then I replied, Easy tiger.
Why did you use the word tiger?
Well, I did think of that when I was doing it, the tiger economy and all that.
Oh, boy.
But it was mainly just an Anglo term, like a London term. It's like, easy tiger, calm down, mate. Keep
Well, that's
your
what I
fucking
said to
pants
that
on.
bloke in the pub that time.
Tigers are in India, Bengal.
Oh, but
right?
I think
there's some
Chinese
Chinese
economy has been
tigers,
referred to as the tiger economy in the past.
not like-
Is that right, Mary? Have you heard
Aren't
that?
there
Like
tigers in
the
China
animals
as
of
well?
China.
I have heard the term tiger economy,
Not
It
really
is.
tiger.
but it's not when I
It could have been just general
It's
East
tiger
Asia or
economy
something.
more. Tiger economy? No. Never
Yeah, I
mind.
don't
The
think
beer,
tigers.
the
I
beer
don't
tiger
think
is from India, right?
Yeah, it is.
that is where most of the tigers hang out. I think. Yeah.
Well, he was saying Pierce got it. Yeah.
Yeah. No.
I think it's much more just of a London thing for you. That's
Yeah,
what
that
it is.
way. That
It
was
was
what-
easily right.
He
off
was
the-
picking up on the double meaning of tiger, and then
He's-
being pedantic about it. He was
the-
about several levels ahead.
Pandantic.
Okay, so let's very quickly, in the 10 minutes we have left. So Margarita Vestager, who John would pronounce better.
Shout
still
out,
have that
shout
name
out
still,
to
is it?
the late Jimmy Buffett. Sorry, he said Margarita.
Truly,
Anyway,
What? Sorry, I didn't get that.
Jimmy Buffett just died.
Oh,
And
did
so,
he?
And so he's linking it back to Margaritaville, Margareta.
So that's
So
completely lost on me. I don't know
he's
what
just
Margaritaville
stretching
is.
this whole thing. Yeah,
Thank
so
you,
Exactly.
thank you.
I
Thank God
got you.
Mary's here to translate. We should
I'll
keep
just
you
sit here
here
all
all
the
the
time.
time. Be your day job is translating Pierre.
So who the fuck is Jimmy Buffett?
Yeah.
You know, he was a billionaire thanks to his Margaritaville business, which was like
I
a
don't know anything about it. I know Warren Buffett. He's not related.
All right, we'll cover it. We'll cover
Yeah,
it
that's his
later.
cousin.
It's his cousin. Right.
Scott and I are equally confused. But
Yeah,
we've been
no.
drinking.
Margaret Vestager.
Yeah, so she's one of the two very senior European Commission commissioners. I can't remember what her job title was. Something
Very young looking
moronic.
photo of her though. Is that taken like about 30 years ago?
Well, look, no, there's a little video of her that she just did the other day. She doesn't look much older there, does she? Her haircut's got a bit shorter over the years. I don't know. Anyway, but she's very influential, and we've spoken about it on the pod loads of times before, and not least, I think, when John was on here, when we were trying to work out the balance between the influence of her and Thierry Breton, where he seems to be a little bit more, if I got this right, he seems to be a little bit more in favour of things like operator consolidation, like the 4-to-3 type of thing.
Right.
And she's a bit more like, oh, that's going to rip off the consumers.
Yeah.
She's a bit more in favour of the consumer. He's a bit more in favour of the business to massively sort of distill their positions. Anyway, she looks like she's clearing off. Because,
for 3 weeks or something.
For 3
like
weeks,
that.
yeah. So she sent a tweet. I'll quote. I'll use her words. As of today, I'm officially candidate for president of the European Investment Bank. I'm taking leave from the EU Commission to focus on my candidacy until the appointment is made. And
Weeks, I guess, is probably.
weeks.
Yeah.
Now, my feeling, and you might disagree with this, Mary, and I better shut up because we haven't got long. My feeling is she's a shoo-in if she wants it because she's so senior. I can't think of anyone, even more than Ursula von der Leyen, who's more influential than her. She's probably one of the most...
You Andress, didn't you?
Thinking fucking
James
Dr.
Bond.
No.
That's right.
Yeah, like when she comes out of the sea. Anyway, best not to think about that right now. I'm thinking she's a shoo-in. I can't think of any European politician who's more senior than her. But anyway, maybe she won't get it. And then if she doesn't get it, it looks like this bloke called Didier Reinders, who's a Belgian, is going to get it.
Yeah, he's coming in as her interim, right?
Yeah, he's coming as an interim, but we assume
Maybe
he'll be
he's
there
permanently.
if she gets it.
Yeah, to me-
So, Mary, over to you. What are
Yeah,
your
I think
thoughts
this
about
is all about, for me, I very much would like to see more aggressive approach to 4-to-3. I mean, it's certainly even in
You're in
some small-
favour of 4-to-3?
I am absolutely in favor for that. I mean, we've done a great job of essentially. I remember when I was on the podcast years ago and I was talking about the falling knife of consumer prices. All we've done is done a great job of bottoming out what we can get at a consumer level across the board. I mean, I think Germany, you guys have talked about, still has some of the highest ARPU, but that could be, and the U.S. has still got pretty good high ARPU, but. You know,
The German
France is-
Telecoms are a lot more expensive in the US than here.
It is, yeah, but I mean, it's still, you know.
I think the German operas are sniggering at the moment about how badly 1&1's doing to bring it back to the Open RAN thing.
Oh, I bet. I'm certain they are. But I think, to me, that needs to happen. You know, I'm delighted. I hope, you know, she's a woman gets this job. That'd be super. I'd love to hear that. But she also, I have a little bit of a scar on my back because she was also hugely influential in bringing about all of the roaming caps.
Yeah.
And that steady slide down in both the
Which is
retail and
great
the
for
whole.
consumers, but not for business.
it killed essentially one of the greatest revenue streams for the operators.
That's a good point.
Just killed it.
So they're all sitting there going, "We've got no ARPU. We're struggling to make ends meet," and that's one of the reasons why.
Oh my God! I mean, I could go on and on about this, as you know, but nevertheless.
Yeah. So your job 2 jobs ago was
2 jobs
roaming.
ago, roaming, yeah. And at Cineverse, and so at Cineverse, and let's face it, I was at Cybernet before that. I helped define roaming. I mean, that was part of what I began my whole career with. So to just decimate this entire segment of the industry's revenue in the EU, and then all it's done is just kind of really depress international roaming prices across the board because it had a knock-on effect.
Right.
Now. That's, my past history with her.
So you're conflicted.
I'm conflicted.
You're pro-woman, but
I am pro-woman, but that really killed me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what I want to know is what's going to happen next. If she does get this job, what's going to happen in the EU as it relates to consolidation? What's going to happen as it relates to, regulation on spectrum? I mean, I think these are some interesting questions. She's been in that role for how long? It's a long time.
Part of the furniture.
Yeah, she's part of the furniture. So I think this could have some huge seismic impacts in my mind. And I think
it's a big deal.
And I really do feel that some of these markets now, Malta, what is Malta doing with 3 or 4 operators? I mean, come on, what is there? 20 million, is it got 40,000 people there? I mean, I'm not saying that disparagingly. I'm just trying to make a point.
But why is there a need for them to have 5,000 customers
however,
each?
Yeah, exactly. So there needs to be some real...
500,000.
500,000, thank you for that. 500,000 people with how many ever operators? At least 3.
Okay, so let's say a couple $100K each. That's not that much.
So when you get back to that, and of course now they can't really charge for roaming, so it's not like they've got an inbound roaming
they've only got
revenue.
One site.
Yeah, and they probably only got one site and everybody's on it. And they're sharing it, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. So actually, they've only got one operator.
Yeah, they've only really got one because the coverage is only this good. And nobody's got a differentiation. It's a nightmare.
Which makes the point about how bullshit it is to insist on this plurality, because the plurality is a sort of figment of the...
Ever since we started to make it so that you have to share mass, because God forbid somebody in Kent wants to have, a cell tower in their backyard, right? We won't even get into that. But I think, there's such... You guys talk an awful lot about, what's happened in the industry. We're getting to this point here where we're going to have to just understand that the growth opportunity for these operators is not where it was. And so we're entering this mature level of where they can go and how much they can grow and maintain.
Yeah.
It's that transition, it's the old adage of, is it a growth stock or is it a value stock, right? Where are we in that transition? And a utility is a value stock. And so, it's just that, where are we in that, not to use the word spectrum,
Really good question.
But I think, and so that's part of the consolidation play. It's understanding what's the economy of scale that can actually be achieved and then subsequently actually maybe potentially deliver a better solution to this consumer.
So if I've interpreted what you said correctly, to a certain extent, people like Vestager can't have it both ways.
That's right.
They can't be constantly championing the consumer.
She has.
Well, yeah. So better that she fucks off then. They can't be constantly championing the consumer and then also going, we've got all these targets about how we've got to be the best and we've got to be better than South Korea at telecoms and all that sort of thing. Something's got to give.
That's right.
Yeah. Cool. That might be a good time to end it unless you got something to put in, because I know we're getting close to the mark. Sorry we left so little time for that bit.
No, I mean, I didn't have much more to say. I mean,
that's good, because that's typically this podcast, is that suddenly I'm panicking and I'm like, fuck, we've got 2 more segments to do and we only got half an hour.
But you are good at making that first one last really long. That's not
me. That's just me being lazy and laissez-faire.
It is every time the MO.
But I honestly do think... that's what podcasts are about, is just
what's going to happen?
Sort of unbridled conversation.
We spent quite a long time talking about beer.
Well,
that's true. There's normally a good half hour of bullshit at the start.
But I like that.
I mean, not bullshit. That's not disrespectful to Lucky Pigeon. I just mean non-telecom stuff.
That's right.
Preamble is probably
thank you all for listening to everything about Lucky Pigeon.
Yeah. Cool.
Bitter for Maine.
Yeah. No, and we've enjoyed it.
Like it.
And do you know what? I mean, we're at the end of it, and I've had the Lucky Pigeon. I've had a couple of our normal hazy chains, and I don't know. I don't think I'm slowing too badly, am I?
No, you're good. No. You both are good.
Wait until you stand up.
One thing I've noticed, I haven't needed the toilet. That's because it's really hot. I've just sweated it all out instead.
Yeah, because it's only, 90 degrees
That's a nice thought, isn't it, to end it on?
Yeah, there we go. Well, let's end it on Ian needing a piss. Okay, all right, I'll leave it there. We won't keep you waiting for so long. We're going to have them every week from now on, except for one little gap, haven't we? In a few weeks' time.
End of the month,
yeah. But thanks a lot for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.